Hey everybody, welcome to Losing Your Mind with Chris Cosentino. I'm your host, Chris Cosentino. We are here to talk about people that inspire, and all my guests are inspiring in so many different ways. And I'm really looking forward to digging deep into how they got to where they are, to the top of their game, how hard they've worked, how much they've given up, and how they're giving back. So without further ado, here's our next guest. I am here with Chris Burkard. I said that correctly, right? I've heard people say it other ways. And, you know, Chris and I have had the great opportunity to connect through social media and through other friends and been able to ride together. But I think what Chris has to offer the world has been such a huge visual introspective into places that a lot of us will never actually get to. Iceland, the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir, surfing in Iceland. I mean, it's pretty incredible where you've been and where you've seen. Let's get into it. I mean, how did this? I mean, let's start at the beginning, right?
Right.
Photography is a really powerful medium. What you do really gives people a true glimpse into things that they would never ever actually get the opportunity to see with their own eyes, right?
Yeah.
And you've done it in such a distinctly unique way. I mean, you changed the way that photographs were shot for surfing competitions, right? And how did this all start for you? Because it's not something that's like, okay, pick up a Polaroid and just start going and having such
Yeah.
great, beautiful images.
Yeah, I think a huge part of it is that we're all a byproduct of our environment, right? And so I grew up in Central California, San Luis Obispo area, and I think for me, like growing up, there wasn't the access to go and travel to some big remote. I wasn't going to Hawaii for vacations with my family. We just didn't have the income to do that. So in many ways, my experience growing up was like going to national parks, going to places we could drive to, places we could afford to go to, going to Big Sur. I think that it left a big impression on me that like those are the places that were super meaningful. That was the expanse of my world, right? So in some way, it felt really interesting when I picked up a camera and I didn't really care about create art, or photography at all. It was like, I grew up in a really small town. I thought the camera could maybe be this tool to get me out of this small town, to get me off the grid, to let me see the world. I mean, that was honestly like that was it. That was all I thought. If it was, being a chef, then that would have been an awesome option. But to me, I picked it up and I was like, this is it. Like, this is going to take me somewhere. And I think in some ways, what I realized really quickly was like that this was a really incredibly validating artistic format. And that when I was looking at options of what I could shoot and what I could create, I realized that like being a landscape photographer, which is what I loved, what I love and what I do mostly now. At the time when I was 19 years old, I quit college and I quit my job and I just pushed into this out there. There wasn't really an option to be a landscape photographer, because what does that mean? Do you have a gallery? You have to have high-end equipment. You have to be selling your work. So what I grew up knowing is I knew surfing, and I knew the places in and around where I kind of had experience and explored. And so I kind of, in some way, combined what I loved for landscapes, these big expansive places, with the art or the act of surfing in these beautiful arenas. And so that was kind of the style that I brought to the table. And it's something that I tried to emulate in everything I was doing, whether I was shooting, again, cycling or climbing or aerial photography. I love this idea of exploring the natural arenas in which we get to play, in which we get to kind of test the human experience. And so for me, that's kind of what photography has been all about. And it's kind of become that tool.
And it's really interesting. So a couple quick things. I read a little tidbit that you bought your first camera, you took a ton of pictures, and it actually didn't work. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I had borrowed, it's funny because at the time I had borrowed my girlfriend, now wife, her mom's camera was like the first one I ever used. I was 18. And it was rad. I used it. I shot a couple rolls. This is so fun. Like I'm stoked. I went to a Goodwill and I wanted to buy a camera. And I was like, so I went and I bid on a camera and I paid like $150 for it, $160, some Pentax. It never worked. Not a single role ever went through it. And I was so disappointed because I went out and shot and I was all eager and I was like, this thing sucks. Like this thing's fully broken, tore it all apart, didn't make it work. And then I had to save up more money and then ultimately like bought, something proper. But it was kind of funny, it's like, I'm glad that didn't deter me and that didn't stop me in some way because it easily could have.
Yeah. And I think that's actually a really great point because you continued, even though you had put, saved all your cash, went and bid on this camera, and then ended up being a dud. I mean, a lot of times people would just become fed up.
Yeah.
Frustrated and be like, oh, it's really expensive. I spent all my money. I wasted my time. And you just drove forward.
Yeah. I think there's some aspect too of like, when where I grew up and when I grew up, it was like, there didn't seem like many options, like I just didn't feel like there was many avenues. College, going to college, getting college paid for wasn't really a feasible option for me. So it was like, what am I going to do? I did a lot of like automotive work and I like, I had a scholarship to an automotive school, but I'm like, I don't want to wrench on cars for the next 60 years, so I felt like it was almost like this was all that I had, in some way. And photography became at a certain point, kind of like my last resort, I guess you could say.
I did hear a rumor that you were a hot rod guy.
Yeah, there was definitely a period. I've owned a lot of vehicles. My first car was a 57 Chevy Bel Air, and I've owned like a lot of cars. I mean, that was like my deal. Like before I picked up a camera, it was like I would do auto competitions through like my, my class in high school and build cars, sell cars. I mean, it became pretty I became pretty brutal. I mean, just being covered in grease all day. Like I loved it, but man, it sucks. I mean, I would imagine it would be akin to being like cooking all day long, every day,
Oh yeah. You go home smelling like a goat. And no matter how much you try, you always have grease on you. Like it's like it's in the air, it's particulated. The front of your glasses are covered, and even worse, the back side of your glasses are covered always. And you never get them clean enough. It's always, it is what it is. I mean, that's just life. So I mean, you traded in like oil, motor oil, and grease for film and developing and there's been this massive, I mean, let me, I've got all sorts of notes here. I actually did homework, which is
I love it, man. You're prepared.
I'm not normal for me. I'm actually, so you've published 6 different books on your adventures and your photography. You've done 4 films, and I know there's a couple more in the docket as we speak, right?
Yeah.
How many do you have in the docket right now?
Well, over the course of like the last 10 years, we've made a ton of films, probably like 15, 20, but like a lot of shorter films, and then a handful of like more like 40-minute pieces. And right now I'm kind of, there's always like something in the works, right? I'm working on a film with Gus and Isaac from Thereabouts about cycling, and Rebecca Rush about cycling through Iceland in the winter. Red Bull just came in and asked a partner on that film. So
congratulations.
We're working with them, which is exciting. They're going to be like our distribution partner and everything, but we have to do like a pickup shoot in Mexico. So we're kind of got to go and find a way to, do that in the next 2 months. And yeah, I just actually shot a little tiny thing for Strava this last week. Like more of like a tiny little edit, but there's always like a handful of projects that are sort of just circling around the perimeter. But there's not always a ton that are like personal and deep and intimate to me, the ones that I feel like connected to. And so I think that's the thing, is like I'm often looking for like what's that project that I feel close to, I feel connected to, I feel excited about sharing. That's kind of the thing for me.
You have so many things going on. I mean, look, you have a partnership with Patagonia where you developed using your imagery, fleece and, shorts. You've done adventures beyond, right? Surf, bike, Iceland, your Hetch Hetchy trip. Yeah. I mean, has there been a favorite so far? Do you have something that has just, you'll sit there and you're having coffee in the morning, you're looking at your dirt jumps in the backyard, knowing that your kitchen's not finished behind you.
Exactly.
And you go,
I would say that over the course of my career, being able to kind of really go to like distant and remote places has been key. And I love the experience that it brings out. I love the idea of putting together an expedition. Like, this is what got me excited about riding bikes in that long form format, is like coming from the surf world where you put together a crew, you know, kind of like based around their talents, right? Based around the things that you feel like they can bring to the table. That's always really exciting. And then all of a sudden taking that and going somewhere unique, remote, you know, remote Norway or Alaska or the Kuril Islands, that I feel like has taught me more about who I am as a person and my strengths and weaknesses than anything else. I mean, in many ways, this is just like, you know, adult education, right? I mean, that's kind of what I've always seen my career path as. There was a trip that we did to an island chain. We made a conservation film. I made it with Renan Ozturk and Taylor Free Solo, these super talented cinematographers. And we went to the Kuril Islands. It's between Kamchatka, Russia, and Japan. And it is like this absolutely ultra remote, you know, I mean, you're going to Kamchatka alone is remote. Kamchatka is like this, you know, the big, massive kind of peninsula that sticks out of Russia, and the biggest city in the world that doesn't have roads that connect to it from anywhere. So it was Russia's major naval base for years and closed off to Americans for about 25 years, until 25 years ago. So going there feels remote. And then you get on a boat and you go to these islands and they're all volcanic and they're exploding and life is, you know, hanging in the balance. And there was remnants of like the Ainu people that were there. Like, I mean, we talk about like archaeological sites in the world. And this is a thing where you go there and you just basically see like, you know, the remnants of a village that nobody's really had the chance to like explore. It's really amazing. So that was like a mind-bending trip, and we documented an environmental effort to kind of preserve the stellar sea lions there with a scientist from Russia. But I would just say, you know, I mean, every trip has its own visceral thing, and I often say that my favorite trip is the last one I went on, because it's the one that's like the most ingrained in your mind. And I think that last experience, that last expedition with Rebecca and Gus, you know, riding through Iceland in the winter was so incredibly eye-opening and transformative and beautiful in its own way. And I think that's the key thing, is like, to me, the camera is just a tool for exploration. That's it. Like, if it can take me somewhere, as I said in the beginning, that's all I want it to do. The bike has been the same thing. Like, it's replaced that in some ways, in some forms. And yes, I love to use my camera, but I'm just as satisfied using my phone as I am with like a big DSLR. So to me, it's about, you know, trying to understand a deeper awareness of the world around us and the people we spend time with. And I think that's like what I'm after. And it doesn't really matter what medium that kind of that takes on.
So with your adventures, right? And like we just mentioned a moment ago, you have so many things swirling around you, and your brain is always focused on what's next and how am I going to accomplish this and building that. And, you know, it's not just, like you said, about taking the photo. It's about getting there. It's about being safe. It's about, how do I pack accordingly? How do you build time? Because it's not like you're a single guy. You've got a wife, you've got 2 children, you have a bunch of alpacas that you have to feed. You know, it's, how do you balance your time to be able to accomplish these things, not only for the sense of adventure, but safely know you're coming back home?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because I think that's my first priority and my first concern. And I think a big part of it is like, I'm a big preparer, right? Like right now, my mind isn't thinking about the next trip or the thing after that. It's thinking about, you know, the next thing, because that's going to require X, Y, and Z, right? So I have to be prepared, and the more prepared I can be. And I think that preparation is more than just like going out and grinding out miles, right? It's thinking through like, okay, how am I going to be eating? How am I going to be functioning? What am I going to be wearing? Like making sure that these things aren't last minute decisions and choices that are coming up. And it's hard for me because, you know, I think it's a bit different where if you're a professional cyclist or you're a professional photographer, you know, you operate in one sphere, and I don't tend to do that. Like, on Saturday, I'm going to Mallorca, Spain to shoot deep water solo climbing. So I've got to bring all my ropes and Jumars and harnesses and everything so I can film and photograph people climbing on cliffs and falling into the ocean. And then right after that, I go and do a Ragnar relay run, which I hate running, but I've been running every day. So I can prepare for that so that I can get my body back to that thing. So, and then I literally get done with that. The next day I fly to Iceland to ride a 900-kilometer bike packing route with like Payson McLevin and Lael Wilcox. So it's like, I'm trying to oftentimes, and some of these are like commercial projects that I'm doing for work, and then some of these are more fun, but ultimately each one being what it is, being important and significant, and me needing to be aware of like what I need to do to kind of, I think, pull my weight. I think that's the big thing, is like pulling your weight in a group. Oftentimes, I think that's what comes to mind. And now, obviously, like you mentioned, coming back safely to my family is critical. And that's a big part of it. And I think that I just find that if I waste too much time during the day, doing just frivolous things, scrolling on my phone, then I won't have the ability to like put in the time that I need to do to see that through. And the older we get, I mean, it's crazy because you don't like heal right away. You're not going to be like, cool, I'm going to stay up all night. I'll just do that. And then I'll be good. No big deal. It's like, it doesn't work like that. I think I have to be more gentle to my body and conscious of that.
So when you think about doing these monster trips, you're talking about like, okay, which bike am I going to ride? Which clothes am I going to wear? But then you also have to facilitate how you're going to shoot your images, and all the equipment that needs to be carried for that. So for instance, on your Iceland trip, right, this past winter with Gus and Rebecca, how did you prepare for something that massive? And also, let's be really honest, that's really a pretty sketchy, frostbite, cold, dangerous situation. Like, you have to have a camera equipment that's going to withstand the cold, right? Mm-hmm. That's not going to freeze. You also personally have to not freeze. So how did you do your research on that? I mean, you're in Southern California. How do you prepare for negative 30 degrees pre-wind chill?
It's funny because I don't have snow anywhere around me, right? So I would take my fat bike and I would go ride on the sand dunes. I would literally go ride on the sand dunes doing like 50-mile days on the dune. It was terrible. Like, that was my training. It was the stupidest thing ever. I mean, talk about, and it ultimately, it was probably much harder than riding on snow, because when you got the good snow, it was like cement. It was perfect. You just ripped through. But it is scary. I mean, we did get frostbite. Like, we had some really sketchy situations that absolutely sucked. Like, I felt at the time, and even now looking back, like, I don't know if I would even do that trip again, knowing the situations that we got ourselves into. But ultimately, we survived and everything's great. And it was an amazing first ascent. And what I learned from it was invaluable. Like, those were incredible lessons to learn to rely upon teammates and people, and have more empathy for people in their suffering. Like, beautiful experience. But I agree, it is challenging to think about the technical side of things, having to charge camera gear, having to keep that camera gear cold, just, parts of your body that you can't let get wet, right? You can't let get cold and sweating. And so we did have a crew that would meet up with us and film from time to time. So there was less stress on me to I guess, document. But the whole point of it was like, I didn't really want to be the sole documentarian on the trip. So I took a camera, Gus took a camera, and Rebecca had like a GoPro, and we all kind of like took turns sort of getting little moments and filming little moments and trying to just kind of tick off, I think, a lot of that stuff. So that was, I've orchestrated projects like this quite a bit throughout the years. And I've tried to, kind of create storytelling around these experiences. And I often find that depending on the crew, depending on their strengths and weaknesses, you can kind of figure out the best way to kind of go about it. Is this a pace where everybody's going to be okay carrying, an extra 2 pounds or an extra pound or whatever it is? Or is this something where like, hey, like iPhones only? Because I think what I've realized as I've gotten older is that I'm looking for the way in which I can tell the most deep and meaningful story. And oftentimes that doesn't mean carrying a big, heavy piece of camera equipment. Oftentimes it means being able to kind of shove a tiny little camera in someone's face and like ask the questions that are more challenging. I think if anything, I want people to like be able to feel like they have an intimate look at this experience from our perspective and not feel like we were putting on a show for anybody.
When you look back at each, I'm sure going back through each trip you've done, each photo shoot, I'm sure that you can pick not just a learning moment, but a very introspective moment on yourself where you've seen something. Is there anything off the top of your head that really stands out above and beyond, whether it be being in that island in Russia and seeing the sea lions there, or watching somebody surf a wave for the first time that you never even thought was imaginable? I'm sure there's those one moment that just made you reflect on things and the choices that you've made to get where you are.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's been so many, and there's many off the top of my head too. And without going into the full story, because it takes a while to tell, I had an experience on an earlier trip to Russia where I was thrown in a jail cell because I had passport issues.
Oh,
and it was in Vladivostok back when I was super young. I was like 22 years old, just absolutely, focused on what I wanted to do, had nothing but, intentions of like going out and kind of breaking through in the surf scene and trying to document places nobody had ever been. I rushed the experience, and I sat there in this jail cell for 24 hours with a guard at my door. And then I got deported to Korea, and all I could do in that moment was just curse curse the heavens, mad at the passport agency or visa agency in San Francisco who wrote my visa date wrong, even though I prepared everybody else's visas on the trip and they got through fine. So I was angry, but it's funny because reflection has played such a huge role in my work, and reflection has played such a huge role in who I am as a person, and taking the time to reflect on that and realizing that like, there's nobody to blame but me. Like I rushed the experience, and in the experience, that's where the growth is. Like, we use this like term, like, oh man, travel makes you a better person. Like that's not the truth. Like, it's not travel that makes you a better person. It's the respect and the learning that you give to the places you go that make you a better person in the process. And oftentimes that starts before you leave your front door, right? It's not like you climb Everest and you get to the top and you're all of a sudden like beamed down upon and you become enlightened. No, you're an asshole when you start out and you're an asshole when you finish, right? So the point is like, I had forgot about the fact that like, maybe I should give my due respect to this place and learn some of the language and learn some of the customs and look into my, visa thing and double check this stuff. And just, I think it was so interesting because it was a lesson that I'm grateful I learned early in life, because it made me slow down and appreciate where I've been. And I mean, I can't even express, there's so many moments like that where, I was trying to kind of like control a situation and my career was on the line, my life was on the line, whatever it was, my job, the editors, the magazine. And all of a sudden I'm like, I can't, there's nothing we can do. We're stuck here or whatever. And like, kind of like the moment that I decided to like, let go, I guess you could say, amazing things happened. Or the moment that I kind of learned to like trust in somebody else, like all these like little kernels of truth that have been bestowed upon me from hard-earned experiences. I feel like that's been the greatest eye-opener with traveling in general. And the fact that I didn't come from like a perfect nuclear family, right? Or have the college experience. A lot of my education came from traveling and came from those experiences out in the world.
I think that's really, really an important point that you make, is like really respecting where you're going and how you're getting there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
And I think that applies to everything, right? That applies to working in a kitchen, that applies to everyday life. Oh. And I think we've
and just realizing like nobody owes you anything, like
exactly.
Nobody owes you anything, just because. And I think that what it did is it squashed any concept of privilege that I might have had as a young kid, like pretty quickly, because I think I came from the world of having to kind of like fight your way through, you know, being super blue collar and whatnot, trying to make it work. It's like you realize quickly, like nobody owes you anything, and like all these experiences can be taken from you like that. So it's pretty eye-opening.
I really like what you just had to say about like the moment you let go was the moment everything fell into place.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that's really powerful in so many different ways. I think culinarily, you make a mistake, and that's where creativity comes from, or
Oh, yeah.
evolution. And it's like this evolution of a dish happens. But I think
Mhm.
that's really, really important, because I think we have our natural instinct is to control, right?
Mhm.
And the older you get, the more you want to put it in a box and make it fit. But
Yeah.
I agree 100%. That moment that you let it go, and it's kind of like when you're finding the flow, right?
Mhm.
And I'm sure you've
Yeah.
had those days,
Yeah.
right? You're out, whether you're surfing, and all of a sudden everything just clicks. And people talk about that, where you have that moment, you're like, how did you do that? You were like, I don't know. It just happened.
Just happened.
And that's the flow, right? It's like
Yeah.
letting it go and letting it happen. And that's in sport, and that's in photography, and that's in cooking. And that I think people need to embrace that more, is just
Yeah.
sometimes letting it go gives the best results.
And you mentioned it, you know, you talked about like this idea of like following recipes. Like creativity has never come from following recipes. And I think that there's the ability to like respect places and tradition and everything, while still finding out and kind of pulling back the curtain to figure out, what can I learn from this, and how can I put my spin on it? How can I evolve this experience in some way slightly more? I mean, to me, I think that's kind of the beauty of what traveling is, and what taking, you know, I love the analogy to food, because I'm a big foodie and whatnot, but like taking what you love about a place and infusing it into something else that like is uniquely your own, right? So that, I mean, to me, that's so cool.
Yeah. And I think, the only thing I would say is never tweak a baking recipe. Baking, a recipe's a recipe for a reason. Don't change
Yeah,
things, it won't work. But
yeah,
in a recipe, when it comes to going to the farmer's market and changing things, and what's in season, what's best, how to evolve a
right.
dish, how to build and layer. And you've been able to layer so many unique things into your photography and in your films, with all this different sport and this sense of adventure. As young folks are looking to you for direction, and I know that your studio is really beautiful. I was fortunate enough to come by and look, and see all the work that you've done and all the images that were up. And I've seen a whole slew of your books. But it's like, how do you inspire this next generation? What advice would you give them, for those younger who want to follow in your footsteps and
Yeah,
say, hey, I aspire one day to be able to shoot an image like that, or
yeah,
have that type of adventure, because they look to you for that guidance. I mean, when I was at your studio, you had a whole slew of people that were there really excited to learn from you.
yeah, yeah. You know, it's interesting, because I remember early in my career, I wanted to do an internship with somebody so bad. Like I was so eager. I emailed everyone I could think of, like all the photographers who worked for the magazines and whatnot. And I remember that most of those responses were like, nah, we're good. And I remember telling myself early on, I was like, if I'm ever in a situation where I can offer something like that, like I'm gonna do it. Like I have to. Like, and I feel proud that that's something that we do. We offer mentorship through internships. We also offer, and I've always been open and tried to be open about offering mentorship through like just writing articles, doing workshops, putting workshops online. There is like a plethora of resources. If somebody wants to know how I do what I do, like the answer's out there. There's no hidden secret, right? There's no like hidden recipe for what I do. I try to be as transparent as possible. But what I tell people often is that the biggest difference, I think, between someone like myself and maybe somebody else who started a career at the same time, is that I'm the one that's stubborn enough to stay out there when the weather gets terrible and the conditions are bad, and everybody else wants to be done. Like that's been the biggest difference, is like I really gave myself to photography. And I mean that in the most literal sense, because I was terrified I had nothing else in my life. And that's what happened. Like I would stay at the beach till the sun went down when everybody else would leave, because I was like, well, there's not many more opportunities. And I think that what I've really tried to do, especially even on podcasts, like sharing and being transparent about the work and what it requires of me, how I do it, how I run a studio. I think that it's critical to inspire the next generation, and not only just inspire them, because inspiring can be like, oh, I saw a photograph, inspiring, but educating them, providing tools, providing resources, like all of those things are critical to me and are important to me. And I think that if anything, I get more joy now on trips, even too. Like if I'm doing an expedition and I know I can't be the principal photographer, I want to bring somebody on who can do that, because it's a way to celebrate them. I mean, I just did a recent ride to Yosemite from San Francisco with a friend, and I hired a young kid, young Filipino kid that I had kind of worked with and mentored, and just to see his work like expand and get better, I was just like, whoa, this is so fulfilling to me. It's kind of like my own kids, you see them experience something and you're like, well, that's way cooler than me, experiencing, Iceland for the 46th time. So I think that's kind of where I get the most excitement these days.
That's really, I think what's the key, like when people say you're a chef, what does that mean? Chef ultimately just means teacher, right? Like,
oh, wow.
I can't do it without other folks. And I'm only as strong as my weakest link, right? So I always have to continue to train and elevate and grow the next generation. And I think that's a really powerful feeling when you see those folks go on and do great things, especially those people that you've mentored, right? Like they open restaurants, or they do their first gallery showing. It's that like, that's awesome, right?
Right. So, and you feel a sense of ownership a little bit, not to like stroke your own ego, but you feel a sense of like, wow, like in some way I helped bring this to life. And this is like, it's like something has its own life now. That's powerful.
Well, I think, like I grew up skateboarding. I don't know about yourself, but something that Rodney Mullen said many years ago was really, really inspiring to me. Is like, you create a trick and you pass it on, and then you see what else they can do with it. And it just keeps evolving and evolving, right? Yeah. You don't make something and hide it in a book.
No.
The book never gets opened again.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly the way that I've always felt about photography. Like I started shooting photos because my mom and my stepdad, they never traveled anywhere. They never really left the US. Like I wanted to bring something back to them because of the fact that I could see the world. And so it's always been about that. It's always been about experiencing something and sharing it with my community, and now my community has expanded. Yours has too. You're probably not cooking for, whatever college roommates or friends or girlfriend, but you're cooking for, prince and princesses. Who knows? What a cool experience to share something that originated from like the desire to just experience it first and foremost, and then share it with people you love. And then that expands. And so I think there's a really beautiful correlation there. And I just try to keep that in perspective anytime I'm doing something.
I mean, it's pretty amazing. We ironically, in two completely separate forms, we give people memories.
Right.
Right. You're giving folks that memory of that beautiful vista with, the sunset, or, and I gave a taste memory. And when you combine those things together, it's a pretty powerful medium, right?
Well, that's the beauty is like travel and food, is really interesting because when you pair them together, it enacts more than just like one of the senses. And I think it's funny because as I've gotten older, I think I've drawn more inspiration from places where there is a culinary experience. And I used to, as a kid, just pour through the pages of National Geographic and look at those. Yeah. But now it's like, I draw inspiration from, the culinary arts, from architecture, from typography. Like the last thing I'm looking for is like, looking at photographs, to draw on. So I think it's just like it's a coming of age thing where you start to kind of like see those connections.
So when you started shooting, was there any inspirational photographers that really, people you looked up to and said, man, that is just that, how did they do that?
Yeah, there was a lot, to be honest. And Michael Fatali was one of the major ones. He's based out of Utah, and he was a large format landscape photographer, shot 8x10 film, just big wooden, amazing camera. And the guy never used any computers, anything. And I had a chance to kind spend a summer with him and learn a bit about just how he would go into these remote backcountry places with like 3 sheets of film, because that's all he could take. And he would just sit there and have to wait for the light. I mean, his images are stunning. They're massive. He like developed his own developing technique where he project across a room, right? Because he made these huge prints, and, you know, the presidents have them in their homes or what. Anyway, I was just always blown away. I'm like, how do you find the patience? Like, how do you curb the excitement for these experiences? Because I would be in those moments and I'd be like, I need to take a picture now, you know, like pulling out and he's like, you know, I try to find other ways to celebrate this. I'll sing a song, I'll write notes, I'll take a picture with my little point and shoot or whatever it is. But he's like, but I need to know when the light is perfect and wait for that moment. And that's, to me, that just always stuck with me, you know. And Michael Fatali was one of them. Like Henry Cartier-Bresson was an influence just because of his writing. I mean, his photographs are incredible, the decisive moment, everything he gave to that. But his writings and musings on art and how art transitions to photography, he always spoke about how, you know, when you look through the camera, it's the same as a canvas. And in a canvas, when you're doing artwork, and that was my background, was doing art, you're creating the depth, you know, you're creating the distance from the mountains to, you know, the shoreline or whatever it is, or the person. So I think when you think about photography and you're like, well, this is my canvas right here, I can move around in this 3-dimensional space and create that depth. I try to always take that in mind. Like, I have that control. And there's a long list of modern day photographers, you know, that have inspired me. But I think that if anything, I kind of have been the most motivated, not by the person who's taking the most mind-blowing photographs, but what they say and what they do, you know. And even Ansel Adams, his work advocating for national parks and wild spaces, and the fact that he met multiple presidents and used his work as a tool to push forward an agenda that would ultimately protect some of these places. Like, to me, that's a great photographer and a great person. And I would aspire to in some way use my work to be more meaningful than just, you know, or I guess last a lot longer than I will.
I think, I mean, we definitely know that that's happening, and I see that happening, and you're definitely setting a mark for a lot of folks, but also I think you're opening people's eyes to the beauty of what's around them, and again, places they can't get to. And I think, you know, there's 3 things that you've said that I think are really, really important: give back, patience, and perseverance. I think those are 3 really, really huge things. Yeah. And that is what I think that next generation needs to hear.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that there is in some ways with certain generations, you know, cultures, you know, there seems to be a lack of that perseverance, you know, like, oh, if it doesn't work out, it's not going to work, you know. And I think that, like, being thrust into a situation where, like, this is your only option, you better give it everything you have. Like, I'm grateful I had that, because I think that had I had other options, I probably would have taken an easier option, because this wasn't like a necessarily jovial and fun career path to go down for many years. It was painful. It was living in your truck and eating 50-cent burritos, you know, and it was, you know, living below poverty line for a long time. But I feel indebted to what those experiences taught me, and the hardships that came with it.
So we're going to veer a little bit here. So let's talk about a couple things. So,
yeah,
worst meal you've ever had in travel.
Oh man.
And then follow it up with the best meal.
Yeah, you know, okay, there's this one thing I ate one time. I'm going to start with a good one, because I think what it was is, like, I did this my first trip to Italy. I was going through the Dolomites, you know, which, you know, northern Italy, the Alps, right? It's different than, like, being like, I'm in Milan, you know, or I'm on the Amalfi Coast. Like, you know, the food in those regions is incredible. In the Dolomites, it's a little different, right? It's a little harder. I spent some time in Switzerland, the Dolomites. I went through Germany. And I guess while I was there, I was just like, I can't wait to get that perfect bowl of pasta. I can't wait to, like, find and access that, like, you know, that unlock that, like, European delicacy, you know, because I had heard so much, you know, about it, and yada, yada, yada. And I was just like kind of disappointed. Like everywhere I went, I was bummed. And I was in, was in the Dolomites trying to find, a good, just expecting to be like full Ratatouille experience, and didn't happen. And then all of a sudden we're driving through Germany, we're driving through Bavaria, and we're coming through like Austria. And we stopped at the base of this castle feature that we had shot photos of. And it was like snowy, really beautiful, gorgeous place. And like that night we were just down in like the little downtown square, and kind of like a little, like a mountain town sort of thing. And I had a bowl of pasta there, and it was like bow tie pasta. It was a pumpkin something, like a pumpkin puree with the red sauce. And it was one of the meals that I'm like, I still feel like I can taste, like the acidity was perfect. The whole thing just kind of like blended together. Like it was like as if you could not taste all of its individual parts, but you could also try to taste all of its individual parts. It was just amazing. It blew my mind. And I had it in the most random of places, right? But yeah, I don't know. I mean, that was really good. And then I would say that on a second thing, driving through Bavaria, we stopped at like a supermarket of all things, and they had a fresh, whatever it is, pretzel, right? What's the actual word? We had it. Pretzel. Yeah, we had it at your place, and the pretzel. I mean, it was hard to. I didn't understand that bread could do that. Like it was so fluffy, and but the outside was like buttered and still like, I don't even know. And the salt pieces were like, they were like locked on there. It wasn't like a, pretzel you get here where you go to take it and all the salt has like fallen off. It was like ingrained onto it. And I got this, the mustard, and it was just, oh my gosh, it was so good. Like hard to process.
So insane to make a pretzel. There's like, how do you make the dough properly? How do you form it? How do you glaze it? I mean, it's such a unique process. I can't make them. I'll say that 110%. My friends over at Rod House make a great pretzel, but
dude, it's tough work. That was a really good one we had over there. I was pretty blown away. I mean, and so much of it comes down to like right when you touch it, right when you touch it, you're like, this is a good one.
Yeah. Does it have just enough give? Does the texture feel right? Does it give a little bit? Is it going to be toothsome on the palate, but is the flavor going to come through? Is the salt going to feel right?
It's like almost like it's crispy on the top where the salt is, but then the bottom isn't like too hard. And it's a funny balance. And then I'll just say like worst meal, like I have had a lot of terrible meals. I mean, I've had a lot of terrible meals. And I think the worst ones are the ones where you like end up getting sick or something like that. It's always like a gas station sandwich, right? Like something that was in a cold wrap, something that was just kind of like, you ate because you had to. But I vividly remember one kind of experience, being in Oman in the Middle East somewhere, driving through the night, and like we were starving, and we had been driving through the desert, and all of a sudden we see this like glow on the side of the road, like a glow. It was like the weirdest orange light. It was just like a meat cone, of like whatever, like some, mystery meat, probably, sheep or this or that. And, we got these like shawarmas, and they're normally amazing, right? So good. And I just like, I remember like getting this thing and just being so starving that you're kind of like just start eating immediately. You don't even like take the chance to like smell it or taste it or anything. And it was just, it was unpalatable. It was just like, I've never really had a meal where like my body kind of like rejected it. And I'm a fan of shawarma. I love that. I've had amazing a million times, but who knows, maybe this was like the bottom of the barrel or what, but it was just not good. And it kind of was like mystery meat, like you just don't really know what it is. And, I don't know. I mean, that was one
chance, right? That is the chance you take when you're doing such unique travel, when you are in the middle of nowhere.
And it's scary though, because the one thing I'll say like, is that, for many years I was vegetarian, then I was vegan, and I've kind of gone back forth, pescatarian, eating meat and everything. And I think the funniest thing is like, I've never been more sick than trying to eat vegan in places like that, because the fruits and vegetables are the thing that's typically going to be the most the unclean, right? So it's just the truth of the matter. And it's like, you're safer eating bread or eating like a cured meat or eating like a cheese or something like that. You're like, this thing's like gone through the phases, like it's good, you know, like,
The
but
process has
like,
been cleared.
yeah, you're like, but trying to, oh, yeah, give me a tomato and lettuce salad. You're like, oh my gosh. So.
And that's something that I think is really important. You know, when with travel and food is this convivial moment, right? It transcends all boundaries. And when you are traveling in places and people present you with items, it's impossible to say no.
One, and I would venture to say that that's one of the big things that I've always tried to understand is like being, you know, again, I was vegetarian for 15 years, but when I would travel and I would go somewhere, if a family would offer me something, you know, I'd be staying at someone's house in Norway and they had taken us in or something like that, or, you know, and they're preparing a meal. It's like, I'm not going to turn that down or starve myself or whatever. First of all, I've got a job to do. I can't just be like, oh, I'm going to fast for the next 2 days, you know? And more importantly, it's like, this is a way to connect. If you want to get a story from somebody, if you want to get an image from somebody that is intimate and that experience is intimate, food is a way to connect. And I think that's critical. It's crucial, actually. And I just think that to not recognize that as such is such a bummer, because I would see friends, you know, who would kind of, you know, thrust what I would say is they're like, you know, their Southern California mentality upon a culture in a place like this, where it's like, yeah, you know, being vegan or vegetarian is amazing, incredible for the planet. It's great. It's not sustainable for the entirety of the world. I'm sorry. It's just absolutely not. There's
Some areas don't have the availability to the product.
There's no way. And this is what I've noticed and witnessed going to somewhere like the Faroe Islands, where for them to be vegan or vegetarian would mean that they're basically getting processed food shipped in from Nabisco, right? Or whatever. And ultimately, like you see in these communities, huge spikes in diabetes and other things because of stuff like that, because it's actually easier now for them just to live in a major city and eat food that's been being sent over from Europe or whatever. That's terrifying, as opposed to eating their traditional diets, which allowed them to survive for thousands of years, right? So I just try to take that into consideration and realize that it's a privilege to be able to eat that way, especially in California where everything's provided to you. But when I'm out on the road, I want to leave a lot of that behind. I also want to leave a bit of who I am behind so that I can take on a bit of that culture and experience and just be open to seeing the world in a new way, be open to tasting the world in a new way. And I feel like that's a huge part of the experience.
So now we're going to go to the last little moment here. It's a little quick fire.
Yeah, man. Fire me up.
Ready?
Yeah.
Hot dog, hamburger.
Hot dog.
Ketchup or mustard?
Mustard.
Okay. Deli or Dijon mustard?
Dijon, 100%.
Nice. Popsicle or ice cream?
Ice cream.
What flavor ice cream?
Oh my gosh. Mint and chip.
And a lot of people like that one. That's a very.
If I had to just go with something. I mean, really though, it'd be like a stracciatella, something like that. Yeah.
Chocolate or fruit?
Chocolate.
Milk or bitter? Chocolate.
I'm just gonna say it depends on where you are in the world. Okay.
Fair answer.
Like you know, Alpine dairy, Germany. You know that's special, right? But everywhere else, bitter. That's like Switzerland, dairy. Everywhere else, dark.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee, but I should be saying tea.
Beef or pork?
Beef.
Nigiri or sashimi?
Sashimi for me.
Nice.
Only because I've been to Japan a lot, but I haven't quite explored all the nigiri options that I really want to, but I can always trust a sashimi. That's the thing.
Cake or pie?
Pie.
Favorite pie?
Mud pie.
Whoa, not what I expected.
Because that's kind of like a sneak answer.
It is a sneak answer.
Mud pie is kind of like a cake.
It is.
No, for sure. If it was a pie, it'd be like, I live in a place where they make like a lullaberry. Like a lullaberries are pretty common.
Oh.
So I love the bitter. I love the bitter of lullaberries. Not too much fruit. Just I love the salty crust, and then I love a la mode. Like that's my jam. Like hot, like a hot pie a la mode. Oof. But also, I'm a huge pumpkin fan. Like pumpkin is like my vice. So yeah.
Pasta or noodles?
Oh my gosh, that's so hard. That's such a tough one. I'm gonna say noodles. I would say if it was a younger me, it would be pasta. If it was like, Chris in high school playing sports, but now like being like ramen, like I couldn't turn down ramen.
Okay. Dumplings or ravioli?
Ravioli.
Burrito, shawarma?
Burrito, 100%. Burrito over all those things.
Super or regular?
Oh, I mean, anything extra is going to be better. Extra super.
Okay. Fish tacos, fried fish, grilled fish?
Oh man, fried fish tacos or grilled fish tacos. To be honest,
And a taco. Let's be honest. You are in the myth. You are like dead center of the Baja fish taco or the traditional.
Here's what I'll say. I would say either, as long as there is a really good white sauce on it.
Okay.
Because I'm a big fan of something creamy, whether it's like an aioli style or like a tartar style or whatever. I want it. It honestly is irrelevant as long as all the other ingredients are there. The salsas, the cilantro, everything. So.
All right. So, mountain bike or gravel bike?
Gravel bike, because it can take you more places. I think more places in a fun way, right? Like that's my thought.
It's just a total utilitarian vehicle.
Yeah. And it's like and that's the funny thing is the mountain bike really, in many ways, it's the ultimate because you can go anywhere you want with it. But is the point going A to B? The point is like going A to B and feeling that enjoyment, being able to get on the road and feel the wind and rip and feel the stability and then get on off the road and be scared. Like that's a great feeling.
Well, Chris, I can't say thank you enough. I know you're super busy. I know you've got planning to do. You've got things coming up. You're busy man. I'm hoping we get to ride again together soon.
Me too. I cherish our time we had on that last ride, just chatting and catching up. And it's been so cool to get to know you and just learn a bit of your history. Like, I feel like I'm not going to date myself by saying I grew up, but I feel like over the last couple of years, just my wife and I, becoming culinary fanatics and watching you and just being able to kind of like understand your process. It's really cool. And getting to know you is a pleasure. So I'm grateful.
Thank you. I appreciate everything and looking forward to seeing your next adventures.
Cheers, man.
Cheers. Thank you.